to the McGill University McDonald Campus Food for Thought lecture series. My name is Grant Clark. I'm one of the organizers of the series, together with Anne-Sophie Caron and Anna Duff. And our theme for this year's series is Dignified Lives for Billions on a Finite Planet, the Food, Water, Energy Nexus. I'll begin with our land acknowledgement. I'm a descendant of Northern European settlers, and I live and work on unceded Indigenous territory. The Kanien'kehá:ka Nation are the custodians of Tiohtià:ke, the territory on which McGill University stands, and of the surrounding lakes and rivers. To the south of Montreal is the community of Kahnawake, and to the west is the community of Kanesatake. I thank these people for having watched over these lands and waters for so long and for continuing to look after them today. A little bit of housekeeping. I'll ask our online visitors to please keep your audio muted during the presentation. We'll monitor the chat window and we'll relay questions to the speaker if you want to ask them that way. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have a question and answer session, and then you're welcome to unmute yourselves and ask your questions verbally if you'd like to do that. And we'll hear your voice over the speakers in the classroom. It is with great pleasure this evening that I introduce our speaker, Dr. Carolyn Begg. Dr. Begg is a faculty lecturer in the Plant Science Department at McGill. She's also the Director of Internships for the Farm Management and Technology Program and co-director of the Barbados Interdisciplinary Tropical Studies Program. Dr. Begg conducts research on food security in the West Island and on ecological agriculture practices, focusing on soil health, microbes and crops and their interactions with the environment. She's won awards for teaching at both the college and university levels, and she supervises 10 to 15 undergraduate projects per year. Dr. Begg is also a steering committee member for the Margaret A. Gilliam Institute for Global Food Security on our campus, a mentor for the McDonald student-run ecological garden, and you'll see her handiwork in the broader community as well, since she's president of the Marché Sainte-Anne, co-founder and vice president of École-aux-Champs, and president of Neighborhood Farm Schools in BC. And she's going to speak to us today about regenerative agriculture and water. Carolyn.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming. Yeah, it's kind of, so it's a little different here, like small here. And anyways, so I'm just going to continue. I'm going to talk about regenerative agriculture and water, but I wanted to be clear that we're going to cover some aspects, but I mean, this is a huge topic, so we're not going to be able to go through everything that's possible with this. Can I just ask, how many people here have heard of regenerative agriculture? Okay, so about half the audience have heard about it. Okay, so I just want to say it's one of the new buzz terms about agriculture right now, but I think it's more than a buzz. I think it's more than that, to be clear. And it doesn't want to work.
Oh, you can use the page.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to use this. Oh. Page up, page down.
Would
Okay.
you like me to help you convince it?
Yes. It was working before. I don't know
It
what
was working before. There we try that.
Okay. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay. So what is regenerative agriculture? So regenerative agriculture doesn't really have a clear definition. There's no accepted version. They're in the process of revising and looking at it, but it has some clear principles, which I'll talk about in a minute. In simple terms, regenerative is a holistic approach to agriculture, which looks at the interconnection of a multitude of basically 5 major principles. And one of the things is there is a focus on soil health. Regenerative really focuses on soil health, and then everything arises from that. However, it's a set of practices, and there's some very clear practices. But it doesn't say you have to avoid synthetic or inorganic fertilizer. It doesn't say that you have to not use pesticides. And it wants to go beyond the reductions of negative impacts to actually enhance the soil system. And this is why it's very attractive to a lot of producers, because it's not like organic, which has a series of no. And I am very supportive of organic. But it says that we're going to help improve, we're going to regenerate things. So it is a very attractive sort of approach. So the 5 principles basically are minimize soil disturbance. So this is really key. It means that you're not going to till the soils. They don't want you to cultivate them at all, that you want to maximize crop diversity. So you want to look at a variety of crops there. And the real reason I'm going to talk about that is it's about the below ground. It's about the roots below ground. And we're going to look at this in a bit. And the other thing too to remember is that as we have a gut microbiome, all of plants have actually a plant microbiome, and they associate with specific fungi and bacteria, and they enhance the soil around them. There's also keeping the soil covered. I'll show you some examples of this because raindrops are the most erosive element that we have, and the fact that we're having more intense storms, this is more damaging for the soil. The other thing is to maintain living root year round. Obviously, it's a bit difficult to do that here because we have winter, but we do have a long portion of time. Like right now, it's November, things are still green, things can still live, okay? So there is carbon being moved from the leaf, well, the limited leaves that are there, down into the soil. It's the photosynthate from the plants that's feeding those microbes. And then also regenerative is very big on integrating grazing livestock into the system. I'm going to talk pretty much about the first 4. I'm not going to really talk about integrating livestock. That's a whole other part of the system. So the other thing too to remember is that regenerative agriculture and permaculture, how many people here have heard of permaculture? Okay, a little bit more. Both of them come from practices and ideas from First Nations peoples. So it's not, and to understand that just because we call it regenerative now doesn't mean that these practices haven't been used in the long term in the past. And so a lot of the ideas were taken from these original practices and then put into this sort of Westernist acceptable term, regenerative agriculture. So we really need to look at some of the look more at these indigenous practices. And so the other thing too to realize is that when we talk about regenerative, we're trying not to disturb the soil. We want to have crop diversity. We want to incorporate animals into it. We want to store water in the soil. But these are all practices that were done before the Europeans arrived here. And it's also, as these articles point out, that there was this thought that we were arriving, when the Europeans came here, we were arriving in an unmodified environment. When people were here before, they modified the environment that they were in this sort of system here. So it wasn't pristine, it was a modified environment. And the other thing that I tell people that I think it's something we've always forgotten about is that at one time, this whole area was under forest and kind of meadow. And one of the reasons for this was the amount of beavers that we used to have here. Beavers massively alter the environment, and they're being reintroduced into some areas to actually increase that modification. And so beavers altered this environment, the First Nations peoples altered the environment, and the Europeans just brought ideas over from Europe and changed things dramatically. So intercropping and polyculture, which is promoted in regenerative, silviculture or agro-pasture, water management, all of these things were from First Nation practices. And permaculture is it's a design system. I'll come back to that a little bit later. So the other thing is that regenerative is really, a lot of people are focusing on this right now because they're saying that this is really going to help with climate change because of the amount of carbon it stores in the soil. One of the reasons it stores so much carbon is because of maintaining those roots there, of maintaining plant diversity and never leaving the soil bare. And so when you have bare soil, you have loss of water and you have loss of CO2 as carbon. The question really is, is regenerative agriculture going to solve all our problems? I'm not 100% sure on that. So Just to go through these other terms, how many people here have heard of sustainable agriculture? Okay, more have heard about this. Sustainable looks at the intersection really of the environment, economics, and social equity. There's been a lot of promotion around sustainable agriculture, but people are kind of moving away from sustainable agriculture because there's a sense that it's not going to change. It's just going to maintain what's there. Biodynamic, I'm not sure how many people have heard of this. Okay. Biodynamic is based on concepts developed by Rudolf Steiner in 1924. What's really interesting is there are a large number of biodynamic vineyards, which is a little bit strange, but this is where there are a lot of practices with that. It's a holistic, ecological, and ethical approach to farming. It also involves the moon and the sun and the planets in its sort of way it looks at the plants and the animals that are there. Biodynamic is certified. You can become certified. Same with organic agriculture. It's a certified system. And it also looks at optimizing productivity. And permaculture is not certified, but it's a design system and it's site specific. So some parts of it are similar to regenerative. So just to look at some of the things here, when we're talking about water, because water is really critical, is that we have quite a bit of water here, 20% of the world's freshwater reserves. But more than half of this water is from lakes, underground aquifers, and glaciers, which the glaciers are melting, so we're going to have less of that. But the other issue is 60% of it drains northward. So it's actually not accessible for us here. And then since we all live within 100 kilometers, or most of us within 100 kilometers of the US border, so we only have about 3% that is actually available for urban, industrial, and agricultural use. So it's not a lot of water. So we need to learn how to conserve it and keep it for our needs. Now, some water users are more efficient than others. And this, we're looking at the amount of water that can be returned to the environment. And water use in agriculture tends to be inefficient. We return less than 30% of the water consumption. So agriculture kind of represents the largest consumer of water in Canada. And again, I'm going to say, when you live in Eastern Canada or the Eastern US, we seriously have problems understanding what a drought is. Has anybody here been out west recently? Okay, that's a drought. That's a serious drought. When we have 2 weeks without rain here, we complain, but it's not a drought. When you go out west and you see just brown and nothing living and they haven't had rain for months, that is a drought. And this is where regenerative agriculture is focused a lot on trying to conserve water in the West. So sometimes it's harder for people out east to consider that. So consumptive water use is water removed from available supplies without its return to the water resources. So what we're trying to look at is trying to get the soils to absorb as much as possible of that water. However, there's a certain amount that will be lost to the atmosphere. Plants transpire, and the soil, actually, there's evaporation from the soil surface, but we can limit that evaporation from the soil surface. So there is some consumptive use by plants, which is lost, but we can limit that evaporation from the surface. Okay, now, the other reason that we're so concerned about this is that climate change is going to have, is having and will have significant negative impacts on agriculture. The intensity of rainfall, the frequency of droughts, and this is going to become more of a problem. Now, the other thing that's kind of not so clear is that after a drought, there are often floods. And the reason for this is when you have a soil drying out completely and it loses its capability to absorb water, you then have floods coming. And then all the water runs off and nothing gets stored in the soil. So you're trying to figure out a way to maintain that water entering, even when there's high rainfall, keep the water going into the soil, have it stored there. And they really are expecting these sort of droughts and floods to have quite a devastating impact on crop yields. So we're going to have to figure out how to deal with this, and especially in Western Canada. So this is just showing just a bit of pictorial. So increasing biodiversity. So if we increase the plant biodiversity, we increase the insect, the animal, everything that's there. Rotating crops, at least that's a way of trying to get some biodiversity in. But if we include cover crops there, then that's going to be very useful. Minimize chemical inputs. If you are really interested in regenerative agriculture, there is a rancher from North Dakota, Gabe Brown, who speaks about this. He is, like I would say, the guru of regenerative agriculture. And he basically has, he's a large ranch, crops and cattle, and he is not using chemical inputs or anything anymore. No-till systems, we'll look a little bit on this. This is not disturbing the soil, and the reasons for that. Integrating livestock, as I said, I'm not going to touch on that for us here, just because it's just more complicated. But cover crops is keeping the soil covered at all times, and I'll show you some examples of that. So the primary objective of regenerative agriculture is to build soil health. And so this means it's going to help the soil retain nutrients, it's going to withstand stresses, and it's going to avoid erosion. And this is going to conserve water in the system and build water quality in the ecosystems. So if the emphasis of regenerative is that this can reduce the amount of water needed for farming. It can reduce the less fertilizer because we're building up the organic matter. And the other thing is we're not going to have as much water and soil running off, causing pollution in our lakes and rivers, or the dead zone in the Gulf. Anybody heard of the dead zone in the Gulf of Mississippi? Okay, that is from agricultural runoff going into that area there. The dead zone means there's actually no oxygen in the water. And the fish avoid that area because they can't breathe. So the dead zone depends on the year, how big it becomes, but I think the last couple of years has been reasonably large. So healthy soils retain water. Because they have a lot of soil organic matter. And the other reason, which I'm going to come to, is infiltration. So if you have a rainfall event, I have some really good photos coming up, which should help clarify this. When you have a rainfall event and the rain comes down, if it cannot infiltrate the soil, it will run off. Even if it's a slight slope, water just finds the lowest point and starts to move. And when water moves, it carries as much as it can with it at the same time. And so if you have a lot of pores in the soils, like the spaces between the soil particles or the aggregates, the water will infiltrate. And one of the reasons that this helps, if you have what they're called biopores, these pores will help water go in. So the more infiltration, the less runoff, the less nutrient movement away. So, and also organic matter, those roots will decompose, build up organic matter in the soil, and then you have greater nutrient retention there. You have the organic matter will release nutrients into the system. And the storage of carbon reduces CO2 in the atmosphere. So we want to reduce that runoff to prevent those nutrients from ending up in places which are a waste. So one of the big things is to optimize the hydrological cycle. And also it promises that you're going to have a more efficient production. You have resiliency in the soil system, and that the farm will be more sustainable with the environment. And it also builds soil carbon. So this is why a lot of organizations that are interested in reducing the effects of climate change or trying to go to carbon neutral, they're very interested in regenerative because its focus is on building that carbon. Sorry, what I was going to say. It's also centered on rehabilitating the soil microbial population, because the microbial population helps decompose the organic matter, and this is really important for nutrient release to the crops. Any practice that kills large populations of soil microbes is discouraged. And again, I want to say with Regenerative agriculture, they never forbid anything. And that's why a lot of farmers, a lot of producers are interested in this, because it doesn't say you're not allowed to do this. They try to say, reduce what you're doing, change your system, but they don't say no. And basically tillage is one of the things that's going to reduce those soil microbes and all kinds of other things, but okay. So, yeah. Oh,
Tillage actually puts air into the soil?
no, not really.
Not really. I thought that was the idea.
It is the old way of thinking of things.
Yeah.
But the thing is that tillage actually will disturb the soil. It breaks up aggregates. You get loss of carbon dioxide, loss of organic matter, and you actually create a sealed layer. I have some pictures that will show this coming up. So tillage does appear to increase aeration, but it's like some very strange diets that you can go on, that you lose some weight, but then it just you rebound into a very bad area. So it's not effective. The other thing too, just to say, with any type of change in agriculture, when you're talking about a soil system, you're talking about a living organism. And one of the things is I've spoken about this, is that when you change your diet, you don't see the effects right away. It takes time for your body to readjust. And that's the same thing with soils. You have a whole living microbial system there. So if you change the system, it takes time for the soil to adapt. It's not in 1 year. You're talking about maybe several years, depending on how bad your soil is.
Okay. And there was a lot of talk about parking lots and keeping the water, using pipes and retention.
Oh, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about agriculture.
Just agriculture.
I'm talking about, I'm not going to go like what they do in urban areas and that sort of thing, because that's something else.
Okay. And then I was also wondering, a lot of in lake studies in Ontario, there was researchers from Cambridge who come and looked at the fish and how they grow, and they saw there was a huge correlation with the health of the forest that was surrounding the
Well,
water.
that's mainly to do with the nutrient runoff, like what nutrients are coming in and what is basically causing problems in the lake itself.
Okay.
So lakes can be either nutrient rich or nutrient poor, and the ecosystem in either one is going to be completely different.
But they saw that the forest, the health of the trees.
Well, but that's also part of the soil tree interaction.
Right.
It's not just the trees. It's not just the forest. It's what's below ground as well.
Soil as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
With the land use between agriculture.
Oh, that's something else. I just want to stick with talking about regenerative agriculture, because again, land use is a whole another story. Because it's another story, and I have thoughts about that, but I want to focus just on regenerative and the effect it has on the soil. So plant diversity, just to understand that plants evolved with microbes. And the way we have constructed agriculture right now, we pretty much eliminated the seed microbiome, the microbes that are associated with all of these crops, certain crops that we're growing, because it hasn't been paid off for some of the companies to focus on these microbes. So the diversity really helps with the microbial population. They're also with the crops, that photosynthate that's in the leaves is transferred down to the roots, and it feeds the microbes. The microbes, there's endophytes that can actually enter into the plant, and then they can bring nutrients and help with solubilization of nutrients for the crops. And so there's now, what you're finding is you're getting these really big companies like Bayer and Syngenta and a lot of others. They're looking at biologicals that they can now put back on the seed microbiome, and now they can start selling this as sustainable or ecological approaches to agriculture. So everything is kind of switching right now. There's a lot of money in this, but anyways. So just to show here, this is kind of an interesting, this is like looking at if you're going to be putting crops between, plants between your main crops. And this is called intercropping. And this is a way of cover cropping, keeping the soil covered once you've taken off, let's say, corn. And if we look here, this is between the rows here, and this is in the row here. This is the main crop here. And here you have these different crops here, and here are them all together. And what you see here is that they're doing quite well. When you have a diversity of crops, there's less competition between, when you have a single species, there's quite a bit of competition between those plants. They're all seeking the same things. But when you have a mix of plants, the roots will intermingle, the microbes intermingle, and you actually will have a higher productivity with the plants. So this is greater storage of organic matter in the soils. You've also, all of these roots, when they die. So this is something that we never think about too clearly. If these are annual crops, when these annual crops die, these are all channels for water to infiltrate and for air to infiltrate. So every one of these are called biopores. So the tap roots will have a bigger system. They will have a larger sort of biopore, but all these small ones, these are all biopores. Next spring, what happens if you plant without disturbing, what roots do is they find the easiest way to grow down. And I have some pictures of this. And they will follow these paths down and they will get deeper and deeper into the soil because they're following those biopores. Now, if you till the soil, you wipe that all out. You close them off. They can't follow it. And if you keep doing that over years, then you're going to see basically a zone kind of compaction or less organic matter. And everything then hangs about in the top layer, which is not good for adapting to droughts or heat or other things. But just to show, a lot of these plants have adapted to live together. Their roots and microbes intermingle, and there's a big interest in this right now. And it's really very different than the way we used to think of things. So here is just showing, again, a bit of a diagram here. So this is basically a natural soil structure without disturbance. And here you've got a lot of biopores that are also created by earthworms, other organisms here, and this is the roots that are here. And then here is reduced tillage. So again, it's pretty deep in the soil. You can see you've got porosity moving down, possibilities of air or water moving down. And if you note here, you can see the roots here are going down quite reasonably far. Conventional tillage, all in this top layer here. And you can see that it's kind of sealed off here. And you can actually see this if you go and dig pits out in agricultural soils, you'll see that's lined. And this is due to this continuous tillage. And so the roots, the problem is that if there is a drought, this means these roots are not very deep. They're not going to be able to access the water down here. They don't have any air. Decomposition is going to slow down. And they will not be as resilient to changes in the climate. So this is one of the things that we need to look at. And again, tillage cuts and seals these pores that have been created by the root systems. So they form these, like what they call these highways for the roots to go deep into the soil. So here it's just that when you start looking, I know this looks like a grub, but it's not a grub. This is actually a root here that's following the outside edge of a pore. This is quite magnified. And here's some others here that are going down the center. And then as it gets bigger, it will fill up the pore or the pore will collapse. And so you have, but this also is going to give air. This will also give oxygen specifically, because don't forget that roots breathe. All right, this is one thing you have to remember. It's not just the above ground plant, but roots themselves need to respire. They need oxygen, and if they don't get it, they stop growing. And so here you have different ways that different types of roots will use these biopores. But if they're cut off due to tillage, then everything stops. And here's just showing earthworms, the types of pores, and they just really increase these macropores that help with water movement and air. And they create this incredible network of channels and spaces in the soil. And earthworms can go extremely deep into the soil, up to 3 meters or so down. So those channels are useful, but again, if you till, you lose the channels and you kill the earthworms. So I just wanted to show you quickly just the different, this is, whoops, wow. Okay, we're going back here. This here is 60 inches. This is daikon radish or tillage radish. This is with a big taproot here, but this will go down 60 inches. These roots will go down that deep. Then we have here sunflower, which tends to be much more horizontal in its approach to getting nutrients and water. hairy vetch, a little bit more dense. But you can see the amount of roots to the above ground biomass. You can see that there's really a lot of roots, and this photosynthate in the leaves are feeding everything down here. And just another one here. This is cereal rye, a very popular cover crop, annual ryegrass. Look at the map that you have here. So any water, everything that's coming down, and look at the limited amount of above ground growth. So if you're worried about erosion or anything in the soil, this will get erosion or like pore infiltration. This is really going to help. And you can see that not necessarily as deep as some of the others, but very, very fibrous here. So all roots have different rooting systems. So we have to think about how we want to mix them together. So basically, when you till the soil, you're breaking up the aggregates, you are releasing carbon into the environment. And you're also allowing water, moisture to escape. You want to keep that water in the soil. You want to allow rainfall to enter in. So that's one of the principles here, is to get rid of tillage, stop tilling. How many people here have gardens? Okay. How many people have cleared everything off their garden right now and all you see is soil? Okay, anybody? Okay, one person was honest. I'm sure there's some other people who have not so honest. This is something you should think about. Okay, I'm just gonna say think about, that's all I'm gonna say. Because that soil is that living sort of skin on the surface of the earth, and that is, tillage is really difficult. It really has a bad effect on the soil system. And you're losing a lot of organic matter from this. The other thing, another principle, is fostering that plant diversity. So this is a bit extreme, I think, but it's effective. So here's a no-till system with residue and the crop growing. CO2 is being absorbed into the soil through the leaves. All the organic matter is decomposing. And the water then is freely entering the soil. There's no runoff. And then, as I said, it's a bit extreme, degenerative agriculture. Here you have carbon dioxide as organic matter is breaking down, because there's oxygen, there's no protection here, there's CO2 being lost, and water is being lost. And so this tillage does decrease organic matter in the soil. And if organic matter is going down, the CO2 is being released into the system. And there's other problems with tillage, but I'll leave it at that. So we were really trying to encourage water infiltration into the soil. And so one of the things that I was reading is that really improving water services, like if regenerative is really going to help with increasing water in the soil, then this could be extremely beneficial. And maybe we should be, not only paying for carbon credits in the soil, but water storage. So this might be something that we should start thinking about. And the other thing too is integrating livestock. But as I said, this is a big part of regenerative, but I'm going to leave that to one side. So just saying here, this is from Ontario, and they're just showing here that you can get this in the springtime. This is after plowing in the fall. It looks to be a pretty heavy clay soil, and you have all this water sitting on the surface, and it's not, it's going to be running off. And here is erosion occurring because the soil is there. So you really want to reduce the soil erosion, because when you have the topsoil moving, you're losing most of the nutrient part of the soil, the highest nutrient part of the soil. So these are things that really we don't want to see, but it's still out there. I'm still, last Friday when I was traveling. So keeping living roots growing throughout the year allows this rhizal deposition to feed the microbes. Also, if you have deep roots, then you're going to increase aeration down deep. You're going to keep organic matter deeper into the soil. And any sort of living crop is going to take up the nutrients that are there. And it's going to protect the water quality and keep those nutrients available for the next crop. So keeping the soil covered, and I'll show you some pictures, which I think make it much more dramatic. So again, if you have bare soil, now, one of the things when I talk about bare soil, people think, oh, you know, it doesn't happen. But if you look at, we plant basically maybe the end of April. Yeah, maybe the end of April and the soil is covered, let's say May, June, July, August, September, October, maybe 6 months. And then if you think of snow melt, which probably could have occurred in February, could have occurred in March. And then we're not getting snow maybe until December or might melt or whatever. We have a long portion of the time where the soil can be exposed. It's not under snow, it's not frozen, it's actually exposed. And so and if the further south you go, the more time that is happening. So what happens is when that soil is exposed, you get that water evaporating, you get more runoff. And the other big thing is you get these extremes in soil temperature. Now, at the soil surface, if you have a bare soil and you take a thermometer, a soil thermometer, and you bring it out to the surface, what temperature do you think it can reach at the soil surface in the summertime? Not even that much in the summer. What temperature can it reach? Yeah, 40 to 50 degrees at the surface. It can get so hot. The thing is, this is not optimum for those microbes or for the earthworms or for any of the other insect life that we need to have. So this extreme fluctuations in soil temperature, it also increases soil water evaporation. This is a big problem. And you get this sort of zone of very unhappy microbes, where if you have it covered, then you have food for the microbes, you have increased soil water infiltration. I'm going to show you some examples of this. A cooler soil surface temperature. This is going to be a big thing in the future. With the increasing heat that we have, we're going to have to find a way of keeping the soils cooler and to reduce that transpiration. So this is because that heat gets reflected back to the plants. Winter cover crops, there are cover crops that will, so this is cereal rye. This one will survive through the winter. It grows very well. And there's other crops that will be just as beneficial. So I want to show you this. This is about, they do these, this is taken from a video. The video's down here. It's a very, there's different videos that are out there. They're very interesting. So what they have here is ground cover and water infiltration. Here is a living crop. This is residue on the surface, and this is a bare soil. And so what they've done is they do a rainfall event, and they collect the water from in the center of the pans and what is running off. So they have a slight slope here. So here is after a rainfall event. They have this rainfall event, and here's the water that's being collected that's coming through this covered soil pan here. But look at the color of the water here. This water here, there's hardly anything moving in the runoff. This is what's infiltrating down. But don't forget, this is maybe 3 inches of centimeters. Let's say 6 centimeters of soil. So normally you wouldn't see this, right? It would be the soil would continue down. So here, but if we look here, this is that covered soil. There's nothing moving into that water. Here with the residue, it's a bit brown. And look at the amount that's coming off from that bare soil. And that is not even a major slope. That's just a slight slope that's there. So here, look at this here. If you notice this compared to, this looks like it's not great, but there's a little bit of aggregates. You think it's kind of loose there. They didn't pack it in. And then you have this completely sealed surface. And so on here, what's happened is the raindrops have come down onto the vegetation. The energy of those raindrops has been absorbed by the vegetation. And what's dripping onto the soil surface is literally just drip. No energy involved, no breakup of aggregates or anything. This is completely broken up. This soil is sealed. Now everything is going to run off. So this person, if this was a soil in the field, would not have water, let's say, for future crops. This is not bad, but it's not great. So just showing here that the vegetation absorbs that energy, the water then just drips onto the soil and is not going to cause a problem. So it doesn't matter the intensity, this one will be okay. Now, this is where it gets interesting. They flip the two of these pans. And this is the soil here that had the residue. This is the soil here that had the just the bare soil. It was only about 6 centimeters. There was no infiltration. It's still dry. It's still dry. No water got down. So even if you think of yourselves that they're watering the soil and you are watering bare soil and some of it's running off, nothing is getting into this soil here. So it might look wet. Let's see, it might look wet on the surface, but nothing is passing through. We've destroyed the pores. Those raindrops are so erosive. And again, just think if you're out in a rainstorm and the rain falls on your face and it stings your face, well, think what it's doing to the soil. So this is why it's so critical to have that cover. And again, this is the best thing when they started, they started to flip these pans and you really see how little is actually infiltrating into this system. And again, here, this is just showing with reduced tillage, you get far more mycorrhizal, another organism in the soil that is very, very important for extended root growth, extends the rooting volume of the soil, sorry. It's mutualistic, symbiotic fungi that's with almost all plants. But what's interesting here, this is the soybeans before cover crop. They put cereal rye on between through the fall and into the winter. Now, if you look here, you see this is the depth of the roots here. And look at it's a little bit deeper here. What's happened here is the soybean roots are following the roots from the cereal rye. They're moving down deeper into the soil. So this is why often this is a very common system using a cover crop here that a lot of people like. Cereal rye works very well. I won't go into the reasons really for soybeans, but you can see the advantages of having those roots go deeper into the soil. And this also helps with water infiltration. There's more water, more organic matter. All of these things are connected. Okay, so this is it's kind of a complicated diagram, but it's not, we're just gonna look at a few things. I think I really rushed this a bit. Oh, no, not really. Okay, anyways. What I want to just focus on here is that the more water that goes in, the more water you have, available water for your plants, the more that's going to recharge the groundwater. In some cases, we need to do that. A lot of wells are in groundwater. We need to make sure that we're keeping that up. In Quebec, I think it's about 33% of water for people or for farms, whatever, is from groundwater. So we need to look at that. So you have better rooting depth, more available water, but the less cover you have, the more likely runoff is going to increase. And then we can expand this to the catchment area, to the watershed area, and really look at all of these things, everything together. So this is why you have to really think all of these things that we've been talking about are very highly connected. So this is just again showing it in a slightly different way. Here you have conventional agriculture and minimal, not very deep roots. You can see there's only a little bit of water up here and it's very dry because there's a lot of evaporation from the soil surface. This is with animals, and the dark color here means more organic matter. Animals will recycle quite a few of the nutrients. They add a lot of organic matter to the system. Here you've got a lot of earthworms, and these are supposed to be bacteria and fungi, but anyway. And then you have a no-till system, but not as good as one with cover crops. And so here, greater water storage, more roots at the channels that the water is following down. And this is sort of a perennial system here. So when you have increased organic matter, it absorbs the water in the soil. You want to get the water to infiltrate. Those are from the pores. It's from protecting that soil surface so that you're not going to have the aggregates break down. So this is how regenerative agriculture really is. Everything, it's connected together, and it really aids in this ability to improve the soil system. So the thing is that, you know, we really have to think about how to increase this, how to move beyond kind of the farm scale to move to bigger area, you know, to maybe the catchment scale, the watershed scale. What incentives are needed? How do we get people to move this way? And I do want to say something here. This is not all on the farmers, all right? This is not at all on the farmers. The farmers have a certain, they are pressured to produce food as cheaply as possible. And this does not help when you're trying to get them to also store carbon, store water, do all these other things. And so I think we need support systems where this is going to help. I'm going to finish and then you can ask, okay. Yeah, whoops, sorry. The other thing is, this is becoming very, very interesting for a lot of big companies. The non-General Mills have all publicly announced regenerative agriculture as a major focus of their companies. Patagonia is working with the Rodale Institute. They're looking at developing an organic certification. Ben & Jerry's have looked at soil carbon to basically work with regenerative agriculture. There's more and more big companies that are taking this move to say, this is what we're doing. And they want to have it as because there is this acknowledgement that these companies have a social component and people buy products based on how they feel that the company is doing socially, and also environmentally. So it's this transformative potential, which the companies really like, and there are a lot of farmers going this way. Now, just to go back to why regenerative and why not sustainable. Regenerative fits with already some existing practices on farms. They're not telling people that you can't do this. There's less of you cannot do this. They're saying, you know, try and reduce this, improve this. Also, regenerate has a much more positive connotation. Sustainable, there's been a lot of pushback against sustainable because they say they just want to maintain things. And so that people don't like this. And they want to improve degraded soils. So this is where regenerative has become very, very popular. I do think that their principles are completely valid. I have nothing, I'm not opposed to any of their principles. And this is coming from somebody who strongly supports organic agriculture, which does rely quite a bit on bare soil. So I have a hard time. I have a complicated relationship between organic and regenerative right now. But I just wanted to show this last thing here. I really like this quote. It says, despite all our achievements, we owe our existence to a 6-inch layer of topsoil and the fact that it rains. So I think that that's really important to realize that if we don't have the soil and we don't have the water, we don't have food. So regenerative does seem the way, I think, as much as I can see. So that's the end of my rather rapid presentation. I'm sorry that it was so fast, but I'll take questions now if people, yeah.
A couple of years ago, I saw a documentary on Netflix, The Big Little Farm and the Biggest Little Farm. How does that fit in with this?
I don't know. I didn't see that. So could you enlighten me a bit about that? What that?
It presented itself as a couple of kids who bought a piece of property in California that was deteriorating badly.
Right.
And they found some wise old guy from the Midwest who sort of taught them some principles of integrating all this stuff together.
Yeah.
No tillage, cover crops, animals on top of things, blah, 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 blah. And they I guess they made a good go of it in 5 or 7 years. So it's kind of a neat story.
Yeah, no, it sounds very similar to what the talk is about regenerative agriculture. Those are all of the principles that they use. And it's very simple principles, but I think it's when you start thinking about where people think tillage is going to improve aeration, when you really look at the whole point to those roots and those biopores and what's happening there, then you realize you shouldn't be tilling. But I understand why people do. And because it's you get caught in one way of doing thing, and then to switch, you have to really allow yourself maybe 3 or 4 years and you don't always have the capital to work through that.
Well, the neat thing about it, they seem to be able to make a buck at it, which I think is a really positive piece.
No, there is a bit of an argument out there because sustainable does have that economic component. So a lot of farmers like, okay, economics is important, that's important. Where regenerative doesn't really, they don't talk about that. They just say you're going to be more resilient, you're going to be more productive. But they don't say that the economics, in those that well, one of the ways of looking at sustainable are the three sort of circles, and the intersection is where you're supposed to be. Yeah, it's a complicated, it's a bit complicated. Yeah.
I'd like to have two questions. One is like, what's the cost of fixing this regenerative agriculture per acre for a farmer?
Cost. To switch over to, let's say, to go from cultivating, plowing, to go to no-till, you have to change equipment. So that's going to be costly. And generally what they say that if you're switching to no-till from cultivating, you're going to see for 5 years, maybe a yield depression, like you're not going to have the yield that you'll have. Also, you have to be careful because some of these soils can have a very compacted layer. Let's say if they've been misused or it's very easy to do, especially with clay soils. It can take quite a bit of time, and you really have to invest. You have to be patient, and that, again, if you don't have a lot of resources to carry you through, let's say 4 years of depressed yield, and then you've just invested in specialized equipment, it's difficult. I'm not saying that this is easy for everyone. Gabe Brown out in North Dakota, he's a rancher, and you shouldn't be, if you're a ranch, you really aren't plowing very much. So he only plowed a part, so he got away with it. He was able to recover fast.
Thank you. One more question. When we see this practice in India, stubble burning after rice
Yeah.
and wheat has come back.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Well,
how good or bad is it from region?
well, I mean, it's not a good thing. All right. And also I know that they were talking about Diwali being the time of the pollution in New Delhi because of the air pollution, because of the burning. And I do know that rice straw is much harder to degrade than other crops, but flax also has that problem. But I know out west they leave the flax, the straw from the flax. I think it's also how the soil may not be active enough, may not have enough biological life to start that. You need the microbes to do the decomposition. So if they can't decompose it, or it's not decomposing quickly, then you have to find other alternatives. But maybe taking it away, but just to realize that when you're burning that straw, that CO2 is going to the atmosphere, but also if you remove it from the soil, we're removing that organic material as well. But it's difficult sometimes to change these systems. You get into this sort of like feedback loops, and it's hard to break out of it.
So leave it as is.
But if it's not going to decompose, then you will have problems when you go to seed the rice again. So you have to figure out another way to work with it, or at least maybe return a bit, take away most. But I would say burning is just not the best option.
We have a question
Yeah.
online, so just the person.
Sure.
I was wondering if you can hear me first.
We hear you.
Is it-
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I was wondering if regenerative agriculture can speed up the process of natural succession. So like, because natural succession usually will happen, like a tree growing will happen during like our lifetime. Can you speed that up?
Well, it depends what your objectives are. So if you still want to cultivate, if you still want to produce annual crops, then you're not going to have trees in the system. But on the other hand, the silvopasture, a lot of people find that there's been research papers out that found that the pasture with trees and animals is one of the most productive systems. So again, you're never going to go back to that sort of like, no, if you're wanting to produce food, you have to alter the environment in some way. So will it help with natural the succession pattern? Probably in a way, but I'm focusing on regenerative as being a food production system.
Yeah, so I was wondering, like, in the use of like per or annual tree, like the use of food producing trees, like fruit producing or nut producing, along with like ectomycorrhizal fungi.
Oh, well, I mean, anytime you have a microbial below ground life, I mean, and you can have the food producing trees, but let's say if you want to produce soybeans or if you want to produce lentils or vegetables, then you have to move into the annual system. But you can incorporate the two together, but again, it's going to have to be something that is going to work for the farmer. It's not always easy to do. Sometimes it's easier to do things on paper than it is in real life.
Okay.
I'm not trying to be facetious or anything, but it's like you have to decide what your objective is and how you're going to maintain it. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
You paint a little picture for me. To me, it would seem that you would end up with a jungle.
No, it's at certain times. Okay, at certain times. So if you go back, if I go back, way back. Just want to look at this my little image here. Sorry. Yeah. This is between the rows of my main crop. So let's say I'm growing corn. This is what's living between. I didn't put a real picture in, but this, you will see this. This is like a mix of cover crops that they put in there. There's a movement away from single species cover. So a cover crop, you're not harvesting. A cover crop is there simply to add, to suck up nutrients, to maybe fix nitrogen, to keep the soil covered, and to grow once your main crop, let's say corn or soybeans or wheat, are off. And so this is fine because it's just adding to the diversity of the system, but most of these will die over the winter, and then you're back to growing your
You might die, but there's still lie there as me.
most of it is the interesting thing is that when this finally starts to grow, like you can broadcast it into a standing crop. The shade will keep it very young. It doesn't grow very fast. It never reaches maturity. It actually will stay very green. And so when it actually comes, like it gets too cold and it freezes, it's still very green. There's no seeds. And so anything that is green decomposes incredibly fast, and there's hardly any residue on the surface. The residue you see are from older plants that have started to, yeah, I see on my show. Yeah.
We have another question online from Mohana. It says, do you think regenerative agriculture can also reduce the rhizosphere pathogens loads, so like for cereals or stuff like that?
I think so. I think that again, I think like if you look at what I always talk about with some of my classes is that we now know that our own gut microbiome controls us. Like basically, if you really think of it, we're simply hosts for thousands of millions of bacteria and whatever else is there. And it will actually control our moods. It controls a bunch of things. And so I think it's the same thing in the soil. We have so altered the soil microbial system that if we go back to having a diverse microbial system there, we probably will not have these like massive outbreaks of fusarium or things like this, because many of these pathogens are not as competitive as some of the other microbes in the soil. Yeah.
The cover crops continue to bury it in the soil at one point and return the organic matter.
Not like the cover crop. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of like a real system, but let's say this is a real system. Usually this is so green that there is nothing there. Like I have planted, like let me show you here. No, which way? No. So this is the daikon radish. Yeah. So this is the daikon radish here. This has a massive tube system. Have you seen pictures of this? You can have 30 inches of this tubular root that goes, that's really very, very big. But come springtime, there's nothing left. It is completely broken down. And actually the problem with it is it breaks down so fast that you can actually get nutrient leaching if you don't have a crop there. Most of them never reach a mature, they don't get to the point where they there's too much carbon in that system, so it takes a longer time to break down. Where you are more concerned, where you have to be more concerned about is the residue that's left over with something that has become mature. Let's say cereal rye that is that's left to go to get to maturity and produce a grain. And then when you have those stalks there. But there's pros and cons, whether to leave it on the surface or to incorporate it. I'm more for, like right now, I'm going to use, my example is I'm loading up my soils, my gardens now with leaves. I put on about this much leaf. By spring, it's down to about this much because the earthworms are active. They're going to stay active as long as the soil is relatively warm and everything is decomposing. So my biggest concern right now, like what I see things as, is disturbing those biopores. Because once I've cut those off by doing that, or even incorporating it, then I start to then you start to have problems. And don't forget, how many people here earthworms? Okay, how many people here think earthworms are good? Are they good in forests? Exactly. I want to say for all of us here who are just thrilled with earthworms, which I can be in my garden, earthworms are an invasive species. They were brought over by the Europeans. They have been spreading outwards since they came. The Europeans came with their pots of plants or whatever and their earthworms, and they've been gradually increasing. If you go up to the Arboretum now, you don't see thick layers of leaves. All you see are the petioles, because that's the earthworms won't eat the petioles. And so all you see are petioles on the ground. If you go to Nova Scotia, to Katimavik in the center of Nova Scotia, in July, you can be walking through leaves like this. And that's because there's no earthworms there yet. I'm going to say yet. But so our system here developed with no disturbance. And so to say that we should incorporate the residue, I think you have to have if you have an active system, again, it's going to take time to build up. I don't think you need to do that. I mean, maybe you can chop it and leave it on the surface and that will speed up decomposition, but I wouldn't incorporate it. That's it?
That's not quite it.
Okay.
But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close our session officially and close off our technology.
Okay.
But for those of you who would like to stay and talk and ask questions, you're welcome to do so for as long as you can keep Carolyn in the room. But I'd just like to thank our online audience for joining us this evening, and for all of you for joining us in person, and for Dr. Begg for a very entertaining talk.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Well, that's fun. And I just want to remind all of you online and those of you here that we'll reconvene in 2 weeks. So on the 16th of November, we'll listen to Dr. Mary Deutsch talk about farmer decision-making at the food, energy, water nexus. So we'll get a little bit more onto the social side of things. So thanks once again for joining us.
Thank you, no problem. Okay. Do you have a question?
I was just gonna ask if it's easier